thank you very much for bearing with us. We did a little switch around, and apparently it didn't work, but now we're on, so we're very happy about that. This is Sarah Goldammer from the Southern Illinois Professional Development Center. I'm here with Bevan Gibson. She's going to be our director at SIPDC, and she's going to be your host today for the Transitions Academy follow-up. So let's go ahead and get started. I will tell you that you're all in a listener mode only at this point. You're muted. That does not mean that we don't want you to ask questions. Feel free to do that. Raise your hand and or put something in the chat box, and we'll be happy to address that. Also, Bevan's going to be asking you some questions, so we'll be happy to unmute you so that you can talk. Again, thanks so much for bearing with us.
Good morning. This is Bevan. As we talked about at the Transitions Academy, Jennifer had expressed that she wanted us to do some follow-up with you guys on your logic models and your planning notes. And so I hope all of you have those with you today, and I hope that you've been making some progress. So we'd like to ask you first, where are you in the process? Have you all started looking at your labor market information, or have you gathered all that information to actually decide what type of an ICAPS program that you're looking at having? Have you then looked at partnering and a choice of program of study or a credential? And then if you've gotten to the point where you're actually selecting team teachers, that'd be really great. So I want to first ask you, if who'd like to share, please raise your hand. Let's do it this way. Raise your hand if all of you have gathered up your labor market information at this point in time. Okay, looks like some of you have started gathering labor market information. Some of you need to actually go on and do that. The Department of Labor has that information. And Jennifer has always said that we can't have an ICAPS program, we can't have a bridge program, we can't have anything that's on the career pathways unless it's actually hooked up to your local labor market information and also hooked up to your regional plan. So as you are in the process of planning, we need to go ahead and figure out if those things are the case. Yeah. Someone asked a question.
Lisa Jones.
Oh,
to make sure that
Lisa wants you to make sure that you know that the labor market information that you are using, the EDR data used for the WIOA regional plan. So that's what she wants to make sure that you are using. Lisa Jones is from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and we're happy that she's here with us today. And thank you, Lisa, for that comment. As you're looking at the labor market information, she just wants to make sure that you're using that EDR data. And so, partnering. Where are we all with partnering? Who would like to share? Raise your hand if you'd like to share. It's going to be a mighty long webinar if people don't want to share. Elizabeth, we're going to unmute you. Go ahead. Elizabeth? You unmute her?
Elizabeth, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Possibly you could put something in the chat box.
Okay. Anyone else want to put something in the chat box about your partnering while we're going on through this? But these are the things that you need to be at least moving on in the process. From the time that we met at the Transitions Academy at the first part of November, I think the process is that you should already have actually been looking at your labor market information, as Lisa pointed out, the EDR data from the regional plans. And you should also be then looking at partnering. If you're in a community college, you need to be looking at what types of programs of study are within your college that you need to be saying, where are they in terms of numbers for their programs, and how does that match up with our labor market information, and then choosing those people to partner with, the deans of those programs of study, and talking to them and saying, okay, is this something that we could have some seats for to help you fill some seats in this program of study? Ginger says that you're approaching CTE instruction and college administration to decide which program would be appropriate. That is absolutely where you should be with the partnering and the POS. And make sure that that's tied to your labor market information. Ginger, I'm sure you're doing that as well. Once you've determined the labor market information and you started talking with your administrators and with your CTE people to actually pick the program of study that works well, or if you're in an ICAPS Model 2, it would be looking at the labor market information and deciding what kinds of credentials you might want to be looking at for your students to actually attain. And your partnering would look like partnering with the training facilities and different training people within the region and businesses and employers. So team teachers would be your next step once you've actually decided which one of those programs of study. So we want to look at the ICAPS planning notes and employer engagement. Employer engagement is a piece that we want the employers, your employers within your regions, engaged. Once you've decided what program of study is there and what's available, and you're partnering, you need to be partnering with your employers to say, we're going to be having some individuals that are going to be ready. Where are you at with this? If the credentials and certificates and the programs of study, if you need to check with your community college, as I said, if you're ICAPS, check with the community college programs of study to see where your students could go on in a career pathway once they've actually achieved a credential or a certificate from you. And then any policy was one of the things in the planning notes. What kinds of things need to be changed? Elizabeth, you have your hand up. We can't hear you, Elizabeth.
Can we just make sure, would you raise your hand if you can hear Elizabeth and we just can't? I want to see if it's a problem, a continued problem on our end, or if it's a problem with Elizabeth's microphone.
Okay, no one
like
can.
Nobody can hear. Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, again, so sorry that we can't hear you. If you have a question or a comment, please put that in the chat box, and we will be happy to answer it and to read what you're writing.
I don't know. There must be a full moon or something with technology today. Anyway, the WIOA requirements are also one of your considerations on your planning notes. Those would be what adult education and literacy services you're offering, what workplace skills are you covering, and then the training component being the third piece of that requirement would be where you need to hook up with the employers, also within the programs of study within the colleges, checking with the labor market information, and you might want to check with your one-stops and see what types of training that they might have to offer as well.
So Valerie says, what recommendations do you have for identifying employers? So do you have any recommendations for them, Bevan?
Recommendations for notifying employers would be to, if you're with the community college, would be to use the advisory councils that the community college uses, because those are full of employers. That's who comprises those advisory councils. If you are not part of a community college, then it's a lot of the times it's just groundwork. And I know, Lisa, I don't know if you're on the phone or if we can even hear you if you're on the phone, but I know that they are working on determining a way that employers could be engaged without everyone visiting the doorstep of an employer, because we know that employers don't like 5,000 people coming to their door asking the same questions because they're busy people. And so if you could use the advisory councils, check with the one-stops to see that with the Department of Labor to see if they actually have some information on some of those employers within that area would be my one suggestion. But, you know, when all else fails, if there's a personal connection that you or someone in your program has to employers within your region, that's also a really good way to do that. I know that some programs have actually had employers bring them in if you don't have advisory councils, if you're just a CBO or another education program, then they've actually invited some employers in to a meeting and fed them and had a lunch meeting to get some of their input. So that might be one possibility as well. The accelerated learning component of the ICAPS planning notes is how long is it going to take your students, as you're planning all this, how long is it going to take your students to earn a certificate? And not just a certificate that's not going to get them anywhere, but how long is it going to take the student to earn a certificate that is industry recognized or that is able to get them employment? And the reason why we say that is because we don't want someone to come into the program and say, well, it's going to be 2 years before you actually are able to go get a job with a complete certificate, because we need to accelerate the learning, and so it needs to be an accelerated program.
Before Bevan goes on, Lisa Jones, and thank you for chiming in here, Lisa. I'm going to read what she's written. That she said that Bevan is correct. They're working with partners in the one-stop at the state and local level to develop business service strategies to address a streamlined model. Also, if I could mention, Lisa wants to make sure that you are all familiar with, and you probably are, but it never hurts to say it again, the Illinois WorkNet website, and that's where Bevan was talking about getting your EDR data earlier. That's where you would find that. Thanks, Lisa. If you have anything else anybody wants to share, but especially Lisa, if you have anything for the common good, feel free to chime in. Thank you.
Moving on, some other pieces in your planning notes are the team teaching, and as I said, unless you have, there's a reason why this is all done in an order, because if you don't have the employers engaged and you don't have your program of study picked out and your credentials and certificates and figuring out any policy changes that might need to be. And when I say policy changes, I'm going to give an example of that. The institutions, oftentimes you figure out it's not an ICAPS program is not, as you're going to find out, an inexpensive kind of a venture. And so oftentimes the policy is that sometimes the community colleges and employers can kick in and actually help to support those ICAPS programs. And so as we go forward with that, you've got to get all those ducks in a row first before you start the actual class and open it up to the students, because the team teaching it should be the ending step as to getting those teachers together, letting them plan their integrated outcomes, plan their integrated instruction, and you need to also have your transition services, a comprehensive transition services in place. I know that Kankakee actually had to actually work with a student who was homeless. So it's not just transportation and childcare. It's whatever needs that the students have, whatever services that they need in order to be able to go ahead and continue and get their certificates. It may be that they need supplies for a welding class. It may need that they may not have the money for those supplies. So those transition services are using foundations and using whatever funding sources that you might need in order to assist those students that are in those integrated programs. Career development, in terms of when they get through with this, they need to be working on how are they going to look for a job and with their certificate that they've earned by the time it's all said and done. You can't wait till the end to then say, now you're going to go look for a job, good luck with that. And so you've got to say, we need to work with, as you go, as part of this ICAPS integrated instruction, we need to talk about your career development. How do you put together a resume? Where are you going to go look for a job? And again, the Illinois WorkNet is a place that actually has some of those types of things. It may be that they're not really sure what they want to do, and if they want to enter your ICAPS program. Let's say you have an ICAPS program in manufacturing, and you have someone that's not really interested in manufacturing, and so they have career interest inventories on the Illinois WorkNet that they could actually take to see where their interest would be. It also shows jobs that are available within certain miles of home if they would have to move, if that's not something that they want to do. So career development is a large component and needs to be planned out ahead of time and how you're going to address that. And then assessing students. How are you going to assess the students to see, if they are ones that need to go into an ICAPS program, if they can successfully do that? Some of the various ICAPS programs and the CTE world are based on different qualifications. So as you're planning and talking about your programs of study and talking with your CTE people, ask them, what are the expectations of the students that are enrolled in this CTE class? What kinds of levels of math or levels of reading? So as you're looking at that, for welding, you want to give them a TABE math test, and you want to set a math requirement. You want to set a reading requirement as well. Maybe not so much so for some of the other ICAPS programs. It all depends on what the CTE is telling you, the expectations of what they have to do and what kinds of subject matter is covered in that class. So you want to think about your assessing and what tests you're going to be offering. Then recruitment is where you need to start looking and putting together. Some programs have put together PowerPoint presentations, and they've gone around to their adult education programs and recruited from there. Some actually work with the community college, and I know a lot of them are putting students that would normally go into Dev Ed. The college has changed their policy and are referring those students into the ICAPS programs. And I also know that the workforce people actually are looking for sometimes individuals that can go into an accelerated program like this, and it may be a really good track for individuals that are looking for workforce training. So monitor and evaluate your program. You have to do that as you go, and then any professional development that you see. I'm hoping that you're all looking at this going, we might need some further professional development in team teaching. And I'm just going to tell you that oftentimes it is difficult for the CTE instructors to get away and do any kind of thing. So Peggy Heinrich at Elgin, we worked with her, and she said that when they had college meetings, she would have the CTE people there for maybe 45 minutes with the adult ed people, and she used that time to work on some team teaching things with those team teachers. So you have to kind of be flexible when working with the team teachers. Yeah, and so as back to the career development piece. The Illinois Essential Employability Skills is something that you need to make sure that you incorporate it into that. And Lisa just pointed out, we've been working on aligning the Illinois WorkNet job skills with our Illinois Essential Employability Skills. We just worked on that this past couple weeks, and that was submitted yesterday, actually. So those things, the Illinois Essential Employability Skills you were given at the Transitions Academy, there is actually a self-check on that you can look at and assess your program to see what kinds of things you need to do. So you need to look at that, and then you can use the Illinois WorkNet to compare all those things with. So I guess the next piece, does anyone have any additional questions or comments at this point in time on any of those topics that we've just kind of briefly hit? The reason why we're hitting it is because we want to make sure that this is not something that is put on a shelf. Jennifer wants these planning notes and your logic models. You will submit your logic models at the end of this time, and so we will need to get those from you at some point in time, and then we'll let you know when. But you should be working on that in developing your ICAPS programs. We wanted to now talk about any current needs that you have. So what are some current needs that you have in terms of those planning notes topics that we just had, that we just went over? So we'll give you just a moment to post any current needs that you have, or if you're on the phone, you could try to talk, raise your hand, and we'll try to get you in. I'll give you just a moment to type in what your current needs are. Okay. While we're waiting for you to type in what your current needs are in terms of the planning notes, I want to go on and start looking at your logic models, because one of these leads into the other. So the planning notes should be filled out, and then they are part of your logic model preparation to fill out your logic model. So the needs and the inputs and the outputs and the outcomes. So what activities have you planned? I know Ginger said she'd already talked to the administrators and the CTE people. So that's something that she's actually, some activities she's planned and who she's going to go after.
In thinking about that, Bevan, Valerie's asking how have existing successful ICAPS programs address staffing? Do they have dedicated staffing?
Yes, they do have dedicated staffing. Existing ICAPS programs do have dedicated staffing. And at the Transitions Academy, we talked about how choosing the, for lack of a better term, the right, quote-unquote, instructors for those things, and for the team teaching piece of that, because they actually work very closely with the CTE people, and so they have dedicated people for each of their CTE or each of their ICAPS programs. And so one teacher is not going to be going and being the one that goes and teaches the welding class, and then goes and teaches the nursing class, and then goes and teaches. So there's going to be one teacher for each one of those ICAPS programs. And I know, Valerie, that sounds like a lot. And as I said earlier, ICAPS programs aren't necessarily always the cheapest programs to run. However, they are one of the most effective. And so it is well worth that. Each of the programs also has a dedicated transitions coordinator or career navigator, whichever term works in your institution. But that person actually spends time in working with the students and is dedicated to those students to find out what their transition service needs are, what types of things that they need, and they kind of walk with them individually. It's a person that they can put a name and a face to, and they connect to throughout the course of that time. If you have a large program, City Colleges of Chicago, you may need more than one transitions coordinator, because you don't want to give one transitions coordinator 200 students, because they can't effectively do that. So it may take additional staff for that. And so some of the larger programs actually have multiple transitions coordinators that work as a team within each of the cohorts. And so I hope that answers your question, Valerie. So yes, they have dedicated staff to each of the ICAPS programs. As we go through and we talk about the needs for the logic model and your situation needs, whenever we talked about the planning notes, one of the things was, as we go through and I asked you guys, what are your current needs? So if you have the possible employers, then what kinds of credentials are required by that employer and that kind of thing. So situation needs are connected to the needs that are on the ICAPS planning notes. What services can the employer provide? What are the benefits to the employer? Employers aren't going to want to do something if there's no benefit to them. Are you going to get them a more prepared workforce? Are they going to be people that actually are able to do what they want them to do? And then when we talk about in the logic model, when we talk about the inputs, well, then in those situations, who actually are going to be your participants? And what staff are you going to need? As Valerie was just asking, how many staff am I going to need? How am I going to get there? Am I going to need an academic advising staff? Because you're going to need, if you're going to the college and you're looking on programs of study and you're looking on a career pathway as to where they might go, it would be the academic advising staff. You might use those individuals within the program. And then whether or not they're WIOA eligible participants. You might have some WIOA eligible participants that would be part of your pool of students. Then when we go to outputs, it's like you may want to look at some activities, such as you need to develop some contextualized academic support course for the curricula that is for CNC machining certification. So the support course is taught by the adult education instructor only. And so the support course is, you don't have one support course for like multiple ICAPS programs. Each of the ICAPS programs has a support course. And that instructor uses that time to actually go over with the students what was going on in the classroom that day, any additional help that they might need in actually understanding what was taught in the classroom that day. Oftentimes people will have the support course be immediately following their class that is in their CTE class, because that's when it's fresh on their minds as to something that they might need some additional help with. And so it's going to be contextualized, that support course is contextualized to basically support whatever is taught in that ICAPS CTE class. I use CNC machining as an example. You want to, another activity you might want to do is to utilize team teaching to deliver contextualized support course and CTE courses. Sometimes the ultimate goal is that we would like is for the CTE instructor to actually have some input into the support course as well. Oftentimes they don't have time for that, but they could at least, when they're doing the integrated outcomes, look to see what the expectations are in that support course. You can utilize a campus coordinator or hire a transitions coordinator. So if you don't have the funds to supply a transitions coordinator, you need to actually work within your institution or work together as multiple institutions to figure out how you're going to actually service students to help those people, the program completers, with job search needs and with any kind of transition services that they need during that time. You maintain, another activity might be to maintain post-certification follow-up. We all know that under WIOA, our requirements now are not just following our students until they separate from our programs. We know that we now have to assist them and make sure that if they get a job, we follow them for a couple of years out, and we actually want to keep in touch with them for a couple of years out to follow up to see what kinds of additional certifications they might want to come back and actually get, or if they actually are maintaining their job. So when you think about the participants in those activities, those are the adult learners, and that's where you need to set, when I talked about assessing students in the ICAPS planning notes, the participants here, this is where you determine what your requirements are for being able to participate in these ICAPS programs. Some people set them at a 6.0. I can tell you that programs that set them for a 6.0 sometimes say we set it too low. It all depends on what CTE pathway you're choosing, what program of study you're going to look into for your program. If it is something that may require a 9.0 and higher, then that's where you need to set it with a tape. If it's something that requires a lot of math, then you need to set a level for math. So when it talks about the activities, you're going to have these things, but then you're going to set at the participant level what level of people that you're going to, the students that are going to have to get into that program. In other words, they may want a 6.0 or higher, and they have to have the desire to obtain a short-term certificate bearing training to begin a career in precision machining technology, and maybe more specifically a CNC, which is computer numeric coding. So that's when it talks about the participants on those output pieces, that's where you set the assessment and what students have to have the requirements to get into that program. You don't want somebody that says, halfway through, why is everything we talk about in here got to do with healthcare stuff? Because it's like, okay, it was an ICAPS program designed to get a CNA or whatever. You want to have them have the desire to stay, because retention in an ICAPS program is a main goal. So a cohort might come in with 14 students, or they may come in with 7 students, and that's where you'd also determine how many will be in your cohort. That all may depend upon how many seats are available in your CTE class for ICAPS students, or if they're going to run an entire section in the CTE world for just ICAPS students. Both ways work. So whatever works in your institution, you need to talk to them and say, do you only have, maybe they need a program that's not quite ready to make, they just need a few more students. That might be a really great program to put, if it's in your labor market information, supported by that, to put your students into that program to fill those empty seats. Then we talk on the logic model. It goes in from outputs to outcomes. And the direct outcomes are what are you expecting? How many credit hours are people going to have, and what certifications are they going to have when they get out of your program? Are they going to have, and then you list it down. So if it's a CNC certification, they're going to have this class level 100, and they're going to get a 0.5 credit hours for that. They're going to have a PMT class 110 that would be a 2.5 credit. So essentially, they're going to receive 10 credit hours, a CNC certification, and 3 credit hour career exploration pieces maybe. So that's where you spell out all the hours and the direct outcomes for how many on each of your classes that work with that thing, with that program, how many hours, college credit hours are they going to get? Because we're looking for college credit hours. We're not looking in an ICAPS Model 1. We're looking for college credit hours. In an ICAPS Model 2, it would be what certifications are they going to get when they're done with this. It wouldn't necessarily be college credit because there's no credit bearing with that Model 2. But you can still have a career exploration course that you can develop and you can teach as part of that within an ICAPS Model 2 as well. Then the broad outcomes what are people going to be prepared to do? They should be able to go into an entry-level machining job. If they're getting a CNC from your ICAPS program, they should be able to step into an entry-level machining job with little or no previous experience and have a career in machining with the skill set that they got while they were in your ICAPS programs. They could also be prepared to continue to post-secondary education and move on into a program of study, which is why, as you look at that entire program of study at the colleges, whether you're ICAPS Model 1 or Model 2, what types of additional education could they actually get if they wanted to pick up the certification for CNC? What else does the college have that they could go back for and add to that to increase their earning potential, to increase their readiness to actually get jobs that may require more training? Program completers are more likely to obtain employment in a manufacturing cluster with a family-sustaining wage. We're hoping that that happens across the board. That's one of the reasons why, and I'm just going to tell you right now, the CNA ICAPS programs are not necessarily the best option, and they are approved, but hesitantly, by ICCB because of the fact that CNAs really don't make family-sustaining wages. It is a very short-term, down and dirty, bam, you have a CNA. But ultimately, in the end, those students that go through an ICAPS program for CNA don't make a family-sustaining wage. And the goal of an integrated program is for them to get credentials and certifications. But the caveat to that is that they need to be family-sustaining wages. So as you're planning, and you're thinking, oh, CNA, that's pretty easy. We can get that done. Well, yes, it's easy. And things that are always necessarily easy aren't necessarily always the best. If you can connect those students then and move them into the other thing, the next step, like an LPN, if you actually ran something, and let me just tell you, the nursing is hard to do that with because it's so state regulated. So look at your labor market information. See what's available with that. Possibly look at various other things, such as medical encoders that have higher paying jobs than they do for CNAs. Look at all the different options. If hospitals are your primary employers within your region and in with your regional plan and with your employers and in your labor market information, if that's your primary employer, don't necessarily fall back on a CNA. Look and see what other types of jobs. Go on Illinois Working It yourself and see what types of jobs within the healthcare field are actually available within your region, and pick your ICAPS program to fill those needs. So medical encoders, EMTs, those types of things. There are tons of other options where they make family-sustaining wages within the healthcare field that are not CNAs. And then down on the bottom of your logic models, you have assumptions. And so assumptions are that individuals that are coming to your program may or may not have their high school diploma. They may or may not have a GED. You may have some students, if the developmental education programs within your colleges recommend people to go into your ICAPS program as part of the policy, then they may actually have high school diplomas, but they lack basic skills. That's the caveat that needs to be there. They need to lack basic skills because we're adult education, and that has to be there. But they lack a GED or lack a high school equivalency, and that are eligible for the program and likely to be hired. So that's another thing. You have to set some standards, because if healthcare is your main field of labor market information, there's a lot of different requirements within the healthcare industry. Can't have a felony on their record. They can't have drug abuse. They get drug tested. So you need to look at the participants that you have within your program and make sure that they are hireable upon completion of your ICAPS program, because you don't want to put them in someplace and then say, sorry, you can't get a job because you have a felony on your record, and the hospitals won't hire individuals with that. A CNC certificate continued to be offered by colleges might be another assumption. Participants will recognize the value of continuing their education and obtain additional certificates and credentials. Might be an assumption. I don't know if it would be a valid assumption on some part, but we're going to assume that they want to go ahead and continue on and improve their lives. Because if you get a certificate that is industry recognizable, you get a job in a CNC, you're going to get out there and go, you know, for me to get more in my job and get more money, I could go back and increase some skills. And so we're going to have some people coming back from the workforce that want to increase their skill set and actually want to go on. So that's an assumption. And external factors, as your local job market is able to sustain continued growth in the future. And that's a big key thing for employers, and it's a really important thing to point out to employers, that if we have this, it's going to continue. You're going to have a labor market pool that's going to come in and help you out. So that's about all I have to say, but I'd like to give you an opportunity if you have any comments or questions. If you want to raise your hand at this point in time, we'd be happy to call on you, or else type it into the chat box. Amy and I will be probably visiting some of the ICAPS programs that we have, so we will be probably visiting a large number of the ones that were in the Transitions Academy. So we would like to know, if you want to kick me an email or Amy an email, we'd like to know what needs you might have, but we're going to come and visit and see where you are in your planning stages. So we won't do that over the Christmas break. Obviously, we're all going to not be there. But in the probably late winter, early spring, we'll be coming around and doing some visits. Lisa, do you have anything else you would like to add to what we've said here today? Okay. Does anyone else have anything else, any questions or comments that they'd like to add? I understand what.
So Valerie says, I understand ICAPS can be attached to ESL or HSE programs, but would be distinct. Is that correct?
Yes, it typically would be distinct. Because the ESL, obviously, if you're dealing with ESL students who have not transitioned into the ASE world, then you're going to be dealing with ESLs at levels like 5 and 6. It's suggested that they be at the higher level of ESL to go into an IET program, because they still have to maintain the ability to do the work that the CTE world is wanting to do. Now, the difference being the support course is going to be ESL instruction combined with, they're still going to get ESL instruction. So they would go maybe to an ESL class, then they would go to their CTE class, and then they would go to their support course. The support course is still going to be focused on the content within that CTE world, but they can still be in all three of those. And that's how the ESL works. With the ABE or ASE, usually the ASE instruction, they're going to receive high school equivalency instruction simultaneously while they're going to CTE world. So that's the difference in those two groupings, and so they're not usually combined. They can be combined in the ICAPS program itself, but then they're going to be split for instruction in adult educational literacy activities, and they could be put together for workplace activities and that kind of thing. But they could attend as one cohort in the CTE world, but the support course, they could be there together, but their separate instruction is going to be in their adult educational literacy activities. I hope that's clear. What we found, though, is that a large number of programs don't combine them, Valerie. They may have an ESL welding program, and they may have an ASC welding program. It all depends on the number of students that you would have that would be interested in going into like a CNC or a welding program. Okay, seeing no further questions, I hope you all have a nice holiday season. We won't be chatting. We'll be having additional webinars for ICAPS programs starting probably in January. And as I said, Amy and I will be, and probably Sarah, will be visiting you off and on a little bit this spring, late winter, early spring. So we wish you well in developing your logic models.
I do want to put a plug in. Next week there will be another webinar for career navigators. So if there was an announcement that went out, that is next Wednesday, the 6th. So if any one of your programs is interested, that's another free webinar. Hopefully we'll have all of our bugs worked out. This was very unusual to have technical issues on this site. So please make sure that you encourage people to sign up for that webinar next week. And we continue to be resourced for you individually. If you have individual questions, I encourage you to email Bevan, or I'll be happy to help you as well. And I will put Bevan's email in the chat box. And otherwise, I think we are finished, right, Bevan?
Yes. Thank you all for participating today and being here, and for all your patience with dealing with these technology issues today. Like Sarah said, this not normally happen on this site, and we were like, oh my gosh. So anyway, Sarah has posted my email, and most of you have it probably anyway. So what?
Okay, so Valerie did have one other question. Are ICAPS programming required for FY18 activity or beginning FY19?
ICAPS programs would be, as soon as you can get one set up, if you can go ahead and get it approved through ICCB as a course approval, because you have to have all those course approvals done. It is recommended that you try within the RFP for this year, it was all the programs would attempt ICAPS programs or integrated programs. And so my answer to that would be, not being from ICCB, would be that it would be an FY18 if at all possible. I know a lot of programs put things in place starting and beginning in the spring semester. If that's not doable for you, then you can apply for things, and hopefully then you would have it starting by summer or fall. So that ICCB would be the one that actually addresses your course approvals. It has to go through all of that as well. So that's why the planning piece is so significant. That's why we're hitting it again, because you have to have all that planned out. Then you have to go through course approval, and then you can start your ICAPS programs. So hopefully that answers your question, Valerie. If you had more specific questions about that, you might want to check with Ben McDaniel. I want to thank all of you today, again, for your patience and for your participation. Have a happy holiday season. We'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.